Have you ever looked at a map and felt like something was missing? Maybe a small town you visited as a kid, or a street that seems to have vanished. For one young man, this feeling became a shocking reality. His home, a village he had known his entire life, simply wasn't on any modern map. It was gone. This discovery sent him on a journey, not through distant lands, but through time, into dusty archives and forgotten records, to uncover why his home had been erased from the world. His name is Ilara, and his story begins in a place he called home, a small, secluded village named Serafina. Tucked away in a valley, surrounded by dense forests and winding rivers, Serafina was a world of its own. Life here was simple, guided by the seasons. The villagers were a close-knit community, sharing stories passed down through generations, stories of the village's founding, of its resilience, and of its unique traditions. For Ilara, Serafina was his entire universe, a place of warmth, belonging, and endless childhood adventures in the woods. He never questioned its existence. Why would he? It was as real as the ground beneath his feet. The first hint that something was wrong came unexpectedly. Ilara was helping his grandfather, a man who served as the village elder and historian, sort through a collection of old family documents. Among faded photographs and letters, they found a stack of old Gillowaid maps. These weren't just any maps. They were detailed surveys of the region, dating back over a century. Ilara, curious, traced the familiar lines of the rivers and the shapes of the hills. And there it was, nestled in the valley, a tiny, hand-drawn circle with the name Serafina written beside it. His grandfather smiled, explaining these were the original land grants, the very proof of their village's long history. A few days later, a friend who had moved to the city came to visit. He brought with him the latest gadgets, including a new smartphone with GPS. For fun, they decided to pinpoint their location. Ilara and his friend stood in the middle of the village square, a place bustling with daily life, and typed Serafina into the search bar. The result was baffling. Location not found. They tried again, zooming in on the satellite view of the valley. The screen showed nothing but an uninterrupted expanse of green forest. The roads, the houses, the village square, none of it was there. It was as if Serafina was invisible to the modern world. His friend joked that they were living in a ghost town, but a cold unease settled over Ilara. It was more than just a glitch. This digital invisibility sparked a burning question in Ilara's mind. Why? Why was his home, a place so vibrant and real, a blank spot on every digital map? He showed the old maps to his friend, who was just as confused. The contrast was stark: a meticulously documented village in the past and a complete void in the present. This wasn't just a mapping error. It felt deliberate. It was an erasure. The feeling of being unseen, of being officially non-existent, was deeply unsettling. Ilara knew he couldn't let it go. He had to understand what happened. He had to find out who had wiped Serafina off the map, and why. His investigation began where the old maps had been found in his grandfather's study. The elder, seeing the troubled look on Ilara's face, sat him down. He confessed that this wasn't news to him. For decades, the villagers had known they were off the grid, but they had come to accept it, even prefer Italiano. The outside world, with its rapid changes and constant noise, felt distant and unimportant. But his grandfather also knew that Ilara's generation, more connected to that outside world, would eventually uncover this mystery. He handed Ilara a heavy, leather-bound journal. It was the village chronicle, a detailed record kept by every elder, stretching back for centuries. The answers, his grandfather said, were likely hidden within its pages. With the journal in hand, Ilara's quest took him beyond the village borders. The chronicle spoke of a time when Serafina was a vital stop on an old trade route, but it also mentioned a great divergence, a period about 70 years ago when the village made a collective decision. To understand this, Ilara needed more than just the village's perspective. He needed official records. He traveled to the nearest city, to the regional archives, a place that smelled of aging paper and forgotten stories. He felt like a time traveler stepping out of his secluded home into the bustling, modern world he'd only seen on screens. The city archives were a labyrinth of shelves and boxes. The archivist, a kind, elderly woman, was intrigued by his story. A village that doesn't exist. She had never heard of such a thing. Together, they started digging. They searched for Serafina in census data, tax records, and government surveys from the last century. At first, they found nothing. It was as if the village had simply ceased to be documented after a certain point in time. It was frustrating, but Ilara was persistent. He remembered the name of the old trade route from the journal and started searching for records related to it. And that's when they found it. Tucked away in a file labeled Infrastructure Projects Mid-20th Century, they discovered a series of correspondence. The letters detailed a plan to build a new, major highway. The proposed route would have cut directly through the Serafina Valley. The project promised progress and connectivity, but for the villagers of it meant the destruction of their homes, their farms, and their way of life. The journal had described this as a time of great fear and uncertainty. The villagers felt powerless against the tide of so-called progress. The next set of documents revealed something extraordinary. The village elder at the time, Ilara's great-grandfather, had been a clever and persuasive man. He didn't fight the project with anger or protests. Instead, he proposed an alternative. He presented the government with a counter-proposal, arguing that a slightly different route for the highway, bypassing the valley entirely, would be more geologically stable and ultimately cheaper to build. He used his deep knowledge of the land, the same knowledge passed down through generations, to make his case. But he also offered something in return. This was the great divergence the journal had mentioned. In exchange for rerouting the highway and leaving their valley untouched, the village of Serafina offered to be forgotten. They voluntarily withdrew from official records. They would no longer be part of the census, pay regional taxes, or receive government services. They would become self-sufficient, a small, independent community hidden from the path of modernization. It was a radical idea, a bold sacrifice to preserve their home. The government, eager to avoid conflict and save money, agreed. The deal was struck. Papers were signed, and over the following years, Serafina was methodically removed from all new maps and official databases. Ilara sat in the quiet archive, the old documents spread out before him. He was stunned. His village wasn't erased by a mistake or by a malicious act. They had chosen this. They had traded their place in the modern world for the right to exist on their own terms. It was a testament to their love for their home and their fierce desire to protect their way of life. The silence they were cloaked in was not one of neglect, but one of sanctuary. The blank spot on the map was a shield, not a void. Returning to Serafina, Ilara saw his home with new eyes. The quiet streets, the simple houses, the surrounding forest, it was all part of a legacy of resistance and resilience. He shared his findings with the village council and the younger generation. The story, which had faded into legend for many, was now backed by proof. It sparked a wave of pride throughout the community. They weren't forgotten. They were protected. They were the keepers of a secret pact made out of love and foresight. Ilara's discovery didn't lead him to try and put Serafina back on the map. Instead, it deepened his connection to his home. He understood that their identity was undefined by lines on a map or a pin on a GPS. It was defined by their history, their community, and the choices they had made to preserve what they cherished most. He realized that in a world obsessed with being seen, with being connected, there was a profound strength and beauty in choosing to be hidden. His journey, which began with a blank space on a map, ended with a full heart filled with a rich, unwritten story of his invisible home. The city that doesn't exist taught him that sometimes the most precious places are the ones you can't find on a map.